Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic and an addict and all sorts of other things. And although this is not strictly interactive in the ordinary sense of people sharing back and forth, it is great to see cameras on and see people's faces. Bob Bazant says, if there's no one catching, you can't pitch. And so it's really helpful to see people watching along and reacting and so on. That helps me a lot. So what we're going to cover tonight is the basics of step 4 plus the resentment inventory. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say might be a bit surprising because it's going to run against a lot of what one hears in the fellowship. So don't heckle just yet. Right, so let's go straight in. You've done step 3, you've had your lovely experience in wherever you've gone, top of a mountain or Regensburg Cathedral or wherever it is. And this is where the book does go into timings. I'm told, now no one has ever said this to me, and I don't think they'd dare, but apparently in New York they tell people they wish people a long, slow recovery. I think that may say more about New York than it does about AA. We've got a timing here, and there are several points in the book where it talks about timing, and this is one of them. It says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. So prep the sponsee to call you immediately having done the step 3. If you're not doing it over the phone or physically together, you prep them to call you to get the first instruction on the step 4. Now, this course of vigorous action, what are the components of it? Now, if you don't like the AA program, don't blame AA because we got it from somewhere else. At least the nuts and bolts of it, once you get past the admission of powerlessness in step 1, everything has come from the Oxford groups, and there are various other tributaries coming into the programme from various other sources, books written by people who had been members of the Oxford groups and so on. But anyway, here's the quotation from the foreword to the second edition. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of, and here comes the list, the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. And that maps, I won't labour the point, because you can look at it on the blog, but you can see how that maps very clearly onto the steps in moral inventory, steps 4 and 10, and so on. Now, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to start with a thing that is commonly said in AA and then run against it. But there we go, that's how I do things. People often say the steps are in an order for a reason. And the question is, well, what's the reason? Now, we want to look at a couple of quotations from the book. The first one is from page 84. This thought, which is a thought about step 9, brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. In other words, you start step 10 as soon as you commit to the programme, which involves cleaning up the past. It's quite common in some parts of AA, I think it used to be more common than it is now, that people wouldn't even touch steps 10, 11 and 12 until they'd done their amends. If I, at 32 years sober, have to, am so inadequate to the day that I have to beg God on my knees in the morning to show me what to do. How is the newcomer supposed to manage? What, they're going to cope, are they? They're going to have a great day just trusting their own intuition. But we need God. No, it's ridiculous. So as soon as I was well schooled. As soon as I made a commitment to AA, Maureen got me on to doing daily step 10s and doing some prayer and meditation, step 11, doing daily readings, sharing the solution in meetings. Uh, uh, at 2 weeks sober, I was told, "We've heard enough of your little sorry stories. Now is the time to start talking about the solution." At 2 weeks. This was the thing that was keeping me sober. And this leads us on very well to a passage from Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. Dr. Bob cited another point of identification. That's the conversation between Bob and Bill when they met for the first time. The association of both with the Oxford group. Bill in New York for 5 months and I in Akron for 2.5 years. That's quoting Bob there. But there was a significant difference. Bill had acquired their idea of service. I had not. This idea, which Bill brought and Dr. Bob never forgot, was put into action immediately. They haven't, certainly Bob hasn't really completed the program properly at this point, but they start trying to help other people straight away. So 10, 11 and 12 get into action straight away. The 12 and 12 is clear on this as well. That one starts to make amends in lots of ways as soon as one is sober, as soon as one has got some confidence that it's not a flash in the pan. You don't wait for the months it takes to start setting things straight. Now, the formal apologies need to wait for a bit. Now, when AA started, I'm given to understand, I don't know whether this was Akron or Cleveland, but they wouldn't let people attend their first meeting until they'd completed the first 8 steps. And they would do this in the course of a few days. If it was with Dr. Bob, it would be in the course of an afternoon, really. You weren't given much more than that. So they were given effectively everything to do at once. Not you do one thing very slowly, then you do the next thing very slowly, then you do the next thing very slowly. Now, I think we have very good success rates in AA today. I've never seen anyone really try who failed. According to the book, in the early days, half the people who really tried, well, some slipped of that half, and the rest showed some patient improvement, but never got permanently sober. I think we're getting better at getting people permanently sober by being nice and solid and thorough and systematic and not leaving anything out. However, what this mustn't do is delay the 10, 11 and 12. I was at a conference in the Rocky Mountains many years ago, and I was with someone else from the UK, and my friend I was with was maybe a year and a half sober, and I think by then he'd sponsored about 100 people. Now, lots of those, you know how long sponsorship can last. Once my record was 90 seconds. I asked the gentleman some questions. He found the questions intolerably intrusive, and that was the end of the sponsorship. Other sponsorship deals lasted over 20 years. But so, bearing that in mind, this chap from London had sponsored 100 people. We're at this conference, and we're at dinner with people. And there were people from all over the States, people 5, 6, 7 years sober, going to these conferences all the time. And none of the people at the table had ever sponsored anyone. Things like their sponsor said they weren't ready yet, or they hadn't completed every single last amend. There were still some debts they hadn't paid, and this waiting endlessly. I had a sponsee years ago who was in New York. I was sponsoring him from London, which I don't normally do, but anyway, we got on very well, and he had a tiny little problem with something called crystal meth, hardly worth mentioning. So his relapses were somewhat lurid, shall we say, because there were other activities involved, and my golly. Anyway, I got him through the steps very quickly in about 4 months, and he was very willing, he's very good, and he said I was easier to get hold of in London than his friends in New York, so there we go. I'm having a go at poor old New York here. I won't tell you what Henrietta Seiberling said when she went to a meeting in New York. That's maybe for another day. But anyway, I said, you have to start sponsoring people. Now, you've made a couple of dozen amends, you're halfway through the amends, start sponsoring. He said, but in New York, you're not allowed to put your hand up for sponsorship until you're a year. I said, you may not get to a year. If you don't start sponsoring people, you may not get to a year. So he started sponsoring people. It's 15 years later now, and he's all right. He's doing all right. His recovery's gone on a different path, but he's doing all right. He's out of that world he was in. He helps a lot of people, so it worked. So I just told him, just don't tell people how long you're sober. Put your hand up anyway. And people flocked to him because he was very good, very funny as well. Very attractive to newcomers and someone with a very grim past. And he'd share about that. And that's what attracted people because he was so clearly changed by the experience. Now, we made this decision in step 3 to turn our will and life over to God. I think it's a legitimate question. Why not just set about going and doing God's will? Why do we need all this ruddy palaver of steps 4 through 9? Can't we just get on with it? Go around being good and nice and helpful in all sorts of ways. Now, of course, one should immediately start being good and nice and helpful in all sorts of ways. But we do need to sort things out. And this is its explanation. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, that's step 3, step 3, could have little permanent effect unless at once, another timing indication, followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. So we're in a sort of catch-22 situation. To be a servant of God, which is really what is on offer, you have to be in communication with God. And there are 6 things which are blocking the communication with God. But the trouble is you need God to help you remove the blocks, which is why you need other people. You need other people's connection with God to give you, like when you're not a member of a gym, a friend will sometimes give you some free passes so you can get into the gym, and then you start to pay your dues or whatever and you become a proper member of the gym. It's like that in AA. There's a grace period where the combination of the rock bottom plus the encouragement of other people gives us a sort of temporary makeshift connection with God. We remove the blocks and then we're in a position to actually start doing God's will. And it's fascinating. In Bill's story, Ebby says that when Bill completes the first 9 steps, he would enter into a new relationship with his creator. In other words, not enter into one, otherwise the word new would be redundant. It is suggesting he's been in a relationship with God the whole time, but you end up in a new relationship, and it's that new relationship being one where we're in communication with God. But also, I'll come to what the 6 blocks are in a moment. Beneath the 6 blocks are a fundamental loyalty to self. I think this is probably genetically and evolutionarily programmed into one, that one looks after oneself. But this reaches pathological proportions in those with a spiritual malady, and one never grows out of it. And so that pathogen lying at the core of the whole problem has to be dealt with. Now, I'll come to that in a moment. The 6 blocks appear to be resentment, secrets, self-will, defects of character, unmade amends, and unfaced creditors. And it's self-will, this conception of oneself as the centre and main objective of one's life. My grip had to be released from that. And the one thing that the steps really did was cause me to recoil in horror at the person that I was play acting. And I wanted to be the person who I recognised somewhere inside I really was. And 2 things happened when I completed the last amend. The first thing was I genuinely lost interest in a lot of selfish things. And I genuinely gained an interest in others. One thing has to be removed before there is space for the other thing. the self is a remarkably persistent pest, and it's never gotten rid of entirely, but it can be deactivated down to, as it were, subclinical levels. So it's still there twittering away all day long, but it can't be fully destroyed, and whatever you throw at it, it's still going to be there. If anyone has seen the film Independence Day, there is a scene in it where these aliens come to Earth and they're terribly powerful and they zap city after city, and there's one of these spaceships hovering over Houston, and in the film they decide, the US military decide what they're going to do. They're going to nuke the thing, and of course it will destroy Houston, but everyone's scarpered from Houston anyway, so they're going to destroy Houston, but they'll destroy the ship, which will stop it from nuking, from zapping Houston and all of the other cities it was going to go on to. Anyway, they detonate this nuclear bomb over Houston, and there's all this, you can imagine in the war room, this cheering as they've finally found a way to destroy this alien ship, and all of the smoke and the dust and the mushroom cloud clears, and they see the same ship circling over Houston, completely untouched by the nuclear detonation. That's the ego. It's not going to give up easily. The one thing which does defeat it is the process of the first 9 steps, if done swiftly enough. They will cause me, they don't really defeat the ego. What they do is they detach me from it. They remove my loyalty to it. And then I'm in with a chance. So the specific purpose of step 4, I'm going to post the paragraph from page 64. And here it gives us our business analogy. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. So what I'm doing in step 4, the first thing that I'm doing, first of all, we need to get a clear idea of what we're essentially cataloguing. The only 3 things I have agency over are, number 1, my beliefs, number 2, my thinking, number 3, my behaviour. Now, all sorts of other stuff gets brought into step 4, all sorts of contextual stuff gets brought in, and some feelings get brought in. But essentially what I'm after, the treasure, is my beliefs, and under that are housed values, attitudes, thinking, the sort of thinking I allow to dominate my mind, and then my behaviour. And this is furnished with examples, and this gives me the material for a step 5. Step 5 has 2 elements. The first element is defects of character. The second element is nasty little secrets from the past. It furnishes us with a sense of what our character defects are, so that they can be counteracted. And it furnishes us with information for steps 8 and 9. Now, one of the great mysteries of step 4, in a sense, is you've got 8 pages on step 4. That's it, just 8 pages. 4 of those pages are on resentment. 4 pages are on everything else. Now, if you were to take a list of character defects, the question is, why does resentment get 50% of the billing in step 4? You take the list of character defects, the St. Augustine prayer book list will mention 50 or 60 defects and then have an elaboration of each, and resentment is one small part of one of those. Why aren't there 4 pages on envy? Why aren't there 4 pages on sloth? Why aren't there 4 pages on any of the other character defects? Vanity ought to be up there, but it's not. Resentment is there. I'm going to come to why, but in a moment. But first of all, to read the relevant passage. Resentment, the book says, is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Now, if you're going to rob a bank, the first thing you have to do is deactivate the alarm system. And that's probably the hardest thing. Once you've done that, the job is pretty easy. Now, the reason I think resentment is in there first, because let's do a little bit of backstory. When it says from resentment stem all forms of spiritual disease, that doesn't mean that resentment is the starting point. It must be read as any manner of spiritual disease is going to stem from resentment, because resentment is not the origin. To have a resentment, there's got to be something upstream. And upstream of the resentment is, I want this, I want that, I want a nice house, I want a career, I want money, I want people to think I'm clever, and hundreds of these other wants. As soon as I become separated from God in my conception and march off into the world to find my fortune with all of my belongings packed up in a red and white spotted handkerchief at the end of a stick over my shoulder, as soon as I'm off, separate from God, trying to make something of myself like a jigsaw puzzle piece that doesn't know that it's part of a jigsaw, it's going to look for where it fits. But also, being separated from God, I'm in a position of want. I'm in a position of lacking whatever it is that God gives me that gives me the sense of okayness and fulfillment, and my place in the universe is secure. So it's interesting in English that want can mean two things. It can mean lack and desire, and it is the lack that creates the desire. The lack of God creates these hundreds and hundreds of desires in these so-called 7 areas of self. I want people to act a certain way. I want sex, and there's a list of what that's supposed to look like. I want all of my material needs to be satisfied. I want all of my ambitions to be fulfilled. I want to occupy a particular place in the world, to have people look at me in a particular way. I want to fulfill my own job spec. All of those wantings come from the fact I'm really wanting God. I'm lacking God. Now, so far so good. You want these billions of things. What is resentment? Resentment is when I recognise that I haven't got those things. And what the ego says is, don't look at me. I'm not to blame. It's them what's to blame. It's everyone else. It's like I was walking along a road, and at a fork in the road, there was God on the right and the ego on the left. And the ego says, come down my path. God is dull, God is boring. What I have to offer is far more exciting. So you go down the ego path, and it's full of brambles and thistles, and it's overgrown, and there are trees which have fallen, and it's awful. And you say to the ego, this is really horrible. I think I've made a mistake. Maybe we should go back to the junction, and I'll let you go at that point, and then I'm going to go off with God. And the ego says, no, 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 no. You're definitely on the right path. You're onto something. The reason you're unhappy is not because you've chosen the path of self, because you've gone down the wrong road. It's because of all of them other fuckers. It's them. They are the problem. You're not the problem. So you need to sort them out. And we can start to see now how resentment gives rise to all forms of spiritual disease, because what it does, it's the alarm system which it's what points me away from the ego. If I'm ever going to get to the truth of what is going on, the resentment is the defense system. As soon as I start to look at myself, have you ever noticed that when you're accused of something in a work context, your first instinct is to find all the reasons why it's all of your colleagues and their bad behaviour that resulted in your failure in a particular case. It's very rare, certainly in my first few years of employment, it was very rare that I said, yes, I did that wrong, this is what I did wrong, this is what I should have done instead, this is how I'm going to fix it, is there anything else? I'd immediately go into justifications. So before I can do the moral inventory, I've got to get all of the resentment out of the way. Getting rid of the resentment is deactivating the alarm system so I can get to the treasure. Now, the reason why all these different types of spiritual disease stem from resentment. First of all, once I'm angry, what I'm doing, I'm reinforcing the path of self, and it's like miracle grow on the character defects. But also, the resentment is the block against ever realizing I have any character defects. It is the thing standing in the way of me recovering from any spiritual illness. So it's a double whammy. Not only does it promote spiritual illness, but it keeps the doctor from the door. It stops me from being healed of any spiritual illness that I've built up. And this is why I think it says, because alcoholism is a particular form of self-will run riot, it's not the only one, but it's one of many. The problems start to pile up because I've lost any mechanism of self-correction. My other half is not an alcoholic, and he has this ability to realise that he's done something wrong and self-correct. So he doesn't build things up. As an alcoholic, I built things up because I had no self-correction mechanism. I was getting older year on year on year, but I never learnt from anything. So my problems built up and became astonishingly difficult to solve. The spiritual malady is cemented in place by the resentment, which is why the resentment has to go before any progress can be made. So this is why we start off with resentment. So let's look at the method. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. If it's on a spreadsheet, it's fine. As a friend of mine says, if it's crayon on linoleum, it's fine. Just record it in whatever way. If you have to dictate it, because you're not very good at writing and spelling and stuff, fine, dictate it. You can use machines to do that. We listed people, institutional principles. Don't forget, in step 4, it's meant to be a comprehensive look at one's entire life and one's entire character. So this is not a list which is supposed to restrict us, it's supposed to cover everything. So people is people. Institutions, any entities which are not people, government agencies, companies, churches, organisations, societies, associations, gangs of people, little cliques, AA groups, political parties, anything which is in the real world but ain't a specific person. And then principles. I've people have tried to explain to me on more than a dozen occasions what a principles inventory is, and I've never really got my head round it. But I can do a resentment inventory on a principle. What is a principle? It's an idea. It's when what pisses me off is not the person, but the thing that they said, the idea. The person I could care less about. It's the ridiculous thing that they said that is bothering me. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, what I think of me, our pocketbooks, financial situation, ambitions, what I want, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. It's going to add security later, and it's going to add pride later. Pride is what I think other people think about me. Security is what I need. So you've got a very simple system here. Basically, you can make a lot out of this. I don't anymore. I'm angry because I didn't get my own way. And that's kind of it. The own way breaks down into these 7 different areas. But essentially, there's nothing more to it than that. I'm not angry because of them. I'm angry because I've got a landmine, a field of landmines. Every desire I have that I'm attached to, every wish for what my life should look like, is like a landmine. And people are just walking through the field, and when they step on the landmine, I blow up. The problem is not people walking. The problem is the landmine, and the landmine is my desire. The landmine is my fixed notions of what my external life should look like for me to be okay. There's not a lot more to this than that. The simple recognition that every single form of emotional upset, again, people sometimes try to restrict this to anger. The book talks about anger, hurt, threatened, burned up, basically any negative reaction, even threatened, that's fear. It doesn't matter what the flavour is. If something happens and I'm bothered gravely or persistently or recurrently, then it deserves to go down. If I still remember it years later, it deserves to go down. Now, the analysis of this, there is a method of using the big book called Big Book Awakening, which is very good in lots of ways, very helpful. And if it's working for you, then wonderful. But I don't think I would get through it, because I think you're supposed to write, I may be wrong on this, I think you're supposed to write about every single resentment. And many years ago, I was in a meeting, and there was a girl who was crying, and I said, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "Well, I'm just so depressed." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I've been doing my step 4, and I'm doing it the Big Book Awakening way, and I've written about 700 resentments, and I've got 200 to go, and I've already got 5 ring binders, and I've been doing it for 2 years, and I'm just so depressed." No wonder you're bloody depressed. It's ridiculous. By the time you've analysed the way in which 20 resentments have been generated by having desires and wishes and demands and expectations which are confounded by the world, there's nothing more to learn after about 20, and you're going to have to drop the whole self-will thing anyway. So you can either drop self-will by dropping self-will, or you can drop it one cell at a time. You choose. The reason self-will gets dropped is a question of principle, because the system is corrupted. The system will never work. This has been already proved on pages 60 to 62. The idea of going for the rest of my life analysing resentments, I think they need to be analysed once. And the point at which they need to be analysed is one good, solid, thorough run through step 4. After that, what we're given is a solution, and for the rest of my recovery, my job is to not permit resentment any more than I would permit shoplifting or animal cruelty. Very occasionally, I've been tremendously bothered, and I have needed to look at it, but not because I need to do, as it were, a resentment inventory, but I need to look at what I'm not handing over to God. That's a slightly different question. And I'm a very great fan of going back through the steps again and again and again as a method of clearing out the stable. But the chief focus of that is not me and all of these ways in which I'm pissed off at people. It's my behaviour, it's my attitudes. It becomes, after a while, an inventory of me, not an inventory of my resentments. If you'll look at the resentment inventory, it's not part of the moral inventory at all. It's the preparation for the moral inventory. The mere fact of resentment, maybe that is a moral inventory admission. But the first real question in the moral inventory is on page 67, where it says, "What were my mistakes?" Everything up to that point is about emotional upset in order to get it out of the way. I was talking to someone a while ago, and they were going through something. They were sober 25 years, going through something, and some family member was acting out. And he said, "Of course, she's gone on my resentment inventory." I said, "Oh, you're doing a resentment inventory?" And he was doing the steps again, and he was in the resentment inventory bit, and he'd written about 100 or 120 people, I wouldn't be able to do an inventory like that. There's something going wrong, I think, if one has to be writing these inventories again and again and again. The behaviour is different because life is constantly changing and evolving, and one acquires greater responsibilities, one's given greater challenges, and character defects show up in different ways. The application of the steps, the traditions, and the concepts to life is difficult and complex. It's hard to see where the faults are. Resentment is entry level. It's simple. I'm upset because I haven't got my own way, and that is the end of it. There's no great lesson there for me anymore. The first time I really did this was a shock to the system, and all of the lights went on. Oh, I'm creating all of my emotional upset. I'm the arsehole. Got it. But then the job is to do something with it, not to simply let resentment then build up and become embedded in order to have to go through this wretched process once a year. One does inventory regularly, but the resentment inventory is something else. Now, how to do it well? All of that was an opinion, and I might be wrong, so just bear that in mind. And I'll probably eat my words next week. But anyway, how do you do step 4 well? It's very simple. We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. Let's take it at its word. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. Therefore, if I'm thorough and honest, I'm doing a good job. It doesn't mean I have to be clever, doesn't mean I have to be insightful, it doesn't mean I have to be accurate, doesn't mean I have to be any of those things. You ask yourself the questions the book asks you. When answers come, you write them down. Simple as that. Now, as it were, the real moral inventory questions we're going to come on to next week. But what we want to look at first is why we need to get rid of resentment, and then the how of it. When we were finished, this is writing out our sample of major resentments. Now, sometimes people are a bit worried. You mean I only have to look at 20 or 30? What I get people to do, something which I would do, is, or look at another 10 and see if you can find anything new in any of those that isn't an identikit copy of one of the other ones. And they discover there's nothing new. There's nothing new in there. And people calm down. They realise it's the same person wearing a different hat. It's not a different person each time. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. Now, sometimes I've heard people suggest that they're taking all of the responsibility on themselves for everything in the steps. That's absolutely not the case. I think it's wonderful here that it lets me know one's observation that other people are acting like jerks some of the time. You're not wrong. They really are. But it's going to turn out that behaviour is not my business. So you don't have to twist your head round trying to... You know that thing about parents, they say, your parents really did their best, they did the best they could. That implies that no one's really responsible morally for anything. If one has moral responsibility, that entails not having done one's best. That's the whole point. And I tried to twist my mind into saying my parents did their best. They didn't. They made lots of mistakes, but they also got a lot right. That's what I had to look at. They got a lot wrong, but they got a lot right. And then you start to look at why people make bad choices and why I would make bad choices, and we come to an element of powerlessness. But trying to make out that everything was fine when it's not, that's not the way out of resentment. Part of it is, I think, recasting the past, so we recognise that the mind tends to memorise all the terrible things and store them up and forget all the good things, and that needs to be rebalanced. But one can't deny that some rotten things really happened. Um, there's a wonderful line in Alice Through the Looking Glass where the Red King says something like, "The horror of that moment I shall never, ever forget." And the Red Queen says, "Oh, you will, unless you make a memorandum of it." And my habit as I went through my life was to make memoranda of all the things other people had done, because I was preparing for the day when I'd need those in order to justify my life, why my life was such a chaotic mess. But anyway, I'm getting slightly off the point here. The point here is, yes, it was bad. There we go. No one's trying to take that away or deny that. The question is going to become, do I want to continue feeling bad about the thing that happened a long time ago? And is it really going to need the years to get over it that is so often promised by practitioners of the steps and practitioners in other contexts? The magnitude of the pain is not symmetrical to the speed of the solution. My friend Jeremy, many years ago, had something called impetigo. Now, unless you've got young children, you probably won't know what impetigo is. It's one of those really disgusting skin things where it's terribly contagious. So you touch someone with impetigo, 2 weeks later you're covered in it. And he got this skin thing, and it was terrible. But he refused to go to a doctor. And we never really worked out why. He was rational in all other ways, and he was Oxford educated. He wasn't dim, and he trotted round. If you go to Soho and Chinatown, you'll see all sorts of weird and wonderful practitioners from all sorts of different cultures. And he tried everything. This Chinese mud was being smeared on for a few weeks, and it just made it worse. And eventually he threw in the towel, and he went to the doctors, and the doctor said, "That's impetigo, mate," and gave him a pill. And within 1 day the scab fell off, and within 5 days the whole thing was clear. You couldn't tell he'd had it, and it had warped his personality over a period of a number of months, where he didn't want to go out, he didn't want to go to work, he'd lost his confidence. And the thing could have been solved at any point. And this is the great horror. If I get over it, I have to admit, I could have got over it at any point, but I didn't want to. I wanted to hang on to it. I would have to admit that the suffering I put myself through was unnecessary. And part of me will spin things out in order not to have to admit that I created, what's that Pet Shop Boys line? You make such a little go such a very long way. Because the thing that I'm upset about 30 years ago is not the thing. It's my memory of my recollection of my recollection of my recollection of a story I told about the thing to Sally, which itself was a recollection of the event. You're not remembering the event. You're remembering a story, a narrative you built up, which becomes like this fetishistic totem representing the story of your life. It is not the event anymore. It's not about the past. Resentment is not about the past. It's about constructing a hellish present. The problem, if you think the problem is in the past, you'll never solve it. If the problem is in the present, you can do something about it. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got, and this is making a little go a very long way, trotting the same story out again and again and again. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us. Now, the thing is, you get over resentment, people are going to continue wronging you. That bit ain't going to change. But anyway, we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. And it's possible to locate the problem within oneself, but to locate it in some aspect of the self which is beyond reach. Genetics, brain chemistry, diagnosed conditions. I was diagnosed with something or other a very long time ago. That was a description of what I was presenting to the doctor with in terms of signs and symptoms. It was not an indication that the thing itself was beyond human control, was beyond treatment, was somehow imposed on me by fate. It's simply a description of what is happening. It says nothing about where it comes from. I would point to star sign, upbringing. I would point to anything but the things which were under my control: belief, thinking, and behaviour. The more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. Only is the operative word there. My life will be miserable and pointless. The proposition was given to me, well, if you feel your life is miserable and pointless, is it possible that you have some resentments you haven't dealt with? Well, yes, I suppose it's possible theoretically. I thought my philosophical problems, which prompted me to read a certain amount of philosophy in my teens, my observation that life was unhappy and pointless, I was looking in the wrong place. I was feeling that my life was unhappy and pointless because of my resentment, because of my 360-degree grievance. And I thought the universe, the structure, the whole way in which the universe was built was the reason for the pointlessness. But here is the rub. Here is what gives the lie to that. Let's say the universe is pointless. Let's say unhappiness and the sense of futility are inevitable because the universe is simply a material clockwork mechanism. Why on earth should one of the clockwork cogs be upset that there is no happiness, that there is no point? Where would the cog know that such things exist if not from the universe itself? So that nihilism, that sense of futility was misplaced. It couldn't possibly be the universe which was at fault. The universe cannot produce something that senses the futility of the universe. It is simply impossible. Now, the next line is the controversial one. To the precise extent that we permit these. Oh, you mean the resentment isn't happening to me? I'm permitting it? You mean the resentment is knocking at the door and I'm letting it in and giving it a cup of tea and a Battenberg cake and getting it to write letters to all of its cousins to get them to come and live with us as well? You mean it's me that's doing this? Oh, so if I have a resentment, I'm responsible for it. I made it. If it's still there, it's my responsibility. A friend of mine used to call me and say, I'm full of resentment. And we laughed, she and I laugh about this, as though she was a pot and someone had taken a quart of resentment and slowly poured it into the pot. And with horror, she awoke to realise that someone else had poured resentment into her. If I'm full of resentment, one needs to reframe things, one needs to rephrase them. I'm not full of resentment. I have systematically filled myself with resentment. That is the truth. Then you can do something about it. But the worst bit, so it makes you miserable, fine. But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal, for when harbouring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink. The impulse to drink can be blocked only by the direct intervention of God. If I'm blocked from God, then I'm blocked from the one thing that can keep me from drinking if the impulse to drink occurs to me. One point on relapse. Tectonic plates around the planet are constantly in movement, exerting huge pressures against each other. And at some weak point in the geological structure of the surface of the Earth, the forces are such that along a fault line, an earthquake occurs. Now, recently, I follow Japanese news, and recently there have been warnings in Japan of a megaquake, and they're getting people to prepare. Now, they say it could be soon, or it could be in the next 30 years, not very helpful, but there are indeed preparations underway. the point about relapse is that the conditions which are propitious to the relapse, the conditions which make the relapse possible, are there the whole time. And you don't feel it. You have no sense. And then at one point, boom, there's an earthquake. And there's no way of knowing. So they prophesied that Fred would drink again. They don't say when, they just say if. They just say whether it's going to happen. So when people relapse after many years, maybe some of those people got genuinely well and became genuinely sick again, but maybe the tectonic plates of the ever active alcoholism had just not produced the right forces to express themselves along the right fault line to produce the relapse. So just because one's sober, one isn't necessarily doing well. Just because one is doing well, one isn't necessarily doing well. The real question is the relationship with God. And one of the key signs of whether one has one is the existence of persistent or recurrent resentment. So this is serious stuff. Let's get on to the solution bit. And the solution is remarkably simple. It's embarrassingly simple. Don't forget, the program proper, its actions start on page 63. 4 pages in, it's already going to have given you a complete and permanent solution to all resentment under any circumstances, all emotional upset, solved in 4 pages. I'm not going to read the whole of this passage. I'm going to get straight on to the meat and potatoes. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. If I am full of demands for how people should act, then how they act will dictate how I feel. And that, if it gives rise to real resentment, will block me from God. But I start the ball rolling. So if I'm going to be detached, if I'm going to not be dominated by the behaviour of others, I have to drop the self-will. I have to, and that's already been decided in step 3, by the way. We've already signed up to that bit. One has to read the small print. No good complaining now that you have to do that. It's implicit in the whole thing that one is going to give up one's right to stipulate how anything should be. Even the satisfaction of basic everyday needs, one can't even stipulate that. So that's the first thing. I must drop my notions of how my life should be. And Dag Hammarskjöld, the quotation, "For everything that has been, thank you. For everything that shall be, yes." And this is the primary neutralization, the withdrawal of all of the demands and the humble submission to God. It's going to say this later on in the prayer, thy will be done. That's what thy will be done means. It means I give up any notion of how I think things should be, any insistence that things be a particular way, because the unhappiness is not coming from the circumstances, it's coming from my resistance to them. When I was 7 years sober, I almost died of a rather unpleasant liver condition, and I was extremely ill. And I was in enormous pain because my liver was doing terrible things, and it wasn't alcohol related, it was entirely separate. And I discovered it was possible to be in enormous pain, not know whether you were going to live or not, and be at perfect peace. And that took away my excuse forever. You can be in pain and be fine. You can be uncertain about whether or not you're going to live and be fine. If you can be in pain and maybe going to die and be fine, you can be fine under any circumstances. God forbid I should have a mouth ulcer, but that's another question. So you have to... That is the one exception. You can be upset about that, because it ruins all small pleasures. That's the problem with the mouth ulcer. Anyway, the real problem behind resentment is the machine which generates it. So if one discovers oneself after 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years still producing resentments left, right, and centre, the system that is generating them in the first place has never been deactivated, and that needs to be done pronto with a good old dose of thy will be done 1,000,000,000 times a day, seeing through the folly of self-will and heartily embracing whatever apparently rotten reality is throwing itself at me, saying, come on, come at me, give me your worst. And then you're manning up to it, or womaning up to it, personing up to it. But we've still got the problem. That neutralizes the machine which generates the resentment. We've now got to get rid of the embedded resentment against all of the other people. We realize that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Now, we're holding two ideas in we're holding two ideas in our minds at the same time. Yes, people do things which are terribly wrong, for which they are morally responsible and liable. However, why do we do things which are wrong? One of the saints says, I do the things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things. Oh, I can't. I'm not going to get the quote. I'm going to get the quotation wrong. Let's scrap that. Failing to do the things you should do, and then doing the things you shouldn't do, even though you want to do the right thing and you know you're doing it wrong. There is a powerlessness behind every character defect, in the way that there is a powerlessness behind alcoholism. There's a paradox here. It doesn't detract from moral responsibility. It's a little bit, if one wants to solve the paradox, it's a bit like this. When someone falls through ice on a frozen lake, they're not responsible for falling through the ice because they're powerless at that point, but they are responsible for having walked out onto the ice without checking whether it was safe. And so other people, they are responsible, but there is a great deal of powerlessness unless one, as we have had, has been given the gift of change by God and the fellowship. The only reason I have a way out is because I happen to be an alcoholic. That I have a relative in recovery, but that's it. The rest of them, they haven't got a way out. This is why one must have immense sympathy for people. Yes, they're responsible. Yes, they do rotten things, but they don't know how to spring themselves from the trap any more than I knew how to spring myself from the trap. And so this is the basis for the compassion. They, like us, are sick, separated from God. And the fact on any given day that I'm not is due to God, not due to my merit. So I can't look down from a spiritual hilltop on other people, even if I am behaving better. The ability to behave better is a gift. It's not something I've earned. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience. Tolerance is leaving them be without trying to fix, change, or control them. Pity is thinking, my God, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. And patience is enduring the suffering or the inconvenience or the nuisance of whatever people's character defects are giving rise to. And then the prayer. This is a sick man. Sometimes they're not, they're just getting on with their day. This person is as they are as the alternative for that situation. How can I be helpful? God, save me from being angry, thy will be done. I'm afraid to say, when I heartily say that prayer and concentrate and meditate on those four elements, I have never failed to make very rapid progress in getting over a resentment. Dropping self-will stops them arising. This prayer gets rid of them. We avoid retaliation or argument. That's in practice and in our minds. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. resentment and all that flows from it is not a psychological problem, it's a moral problem and a spiritual problem. It comes from the notion that I deserve to get my own way and I deserve to stamp my little foot when I don't, and I'm wrong on both counts. So I don't permit resentment or any form of persistent emotional upset. I had an emotional upset in February this year, which took 6 weeks to get rid of. But I was not idle in those 6 weeks. I was doing spiritual listening and writing and reading and all sorts of things for 3 or 4 hours a day to shift the thing. It was a great big lump I had to swallow about one area of my life. I don't care to go into the details now. So the thing is, if it persists, sometimes it's because you're working very hard to allow God to reframe a whole area of your life, and it takes a few weeks or even a few months. When I was 17 years sober, there was something that took 3 months to get past. But what there's no excuse for is waiting before one starts the process. Within 24 hours of that hitting in February, I was on it. I was dealing with it. I was taking action. You can be forgiven for it taking a very long time to clear some things, but what I can't be excused of is indulging the resentment for a long time. So the point here, what this is all about, we're about to start step 4 next week. These first 4 pages of the resentment inventory are there to clear the ground, because it is only when I can look at others with compassion that I'll be able to look at myself fairly, that I'll be able to answer the questions on page 67. So the first one we'll cover next week, mistakes, and then the others. I can only look at the first question of step 4 when I have got the resentment out of the way, when I've deactivated the alarm. So we've got a whole load of questions, which is absolutely splendid. The distinction between thorough and being comprehensive in relation to the resentment inventory. So now the fact is, any notion that people have that a step 4 could even be comprehensive is quite wrong. C.S. Lewis writes about this very well. He talks about the fact that all through every day, you're experiencing a gazillion things and doing a gazillion things, but even by the time you get to the next day, you can't remember. You can remember only a fraction of them. Of the vast cataract of events, of the things for which one is responsible that pass through one's life, one recalls only the smallest number. Memory simply doesn't work that way. Also, memory is extremely flawed. So even if one thinks one is being comprehensive by scouring one's memory for absolutely everything and writing it down, that won't be a comprehensive account. It'll be a comprehensive account of what is in your memory, but it won't be a comprehensive account of your life. It won't even begin. And you go and do your step 9s, you discover that every single one of those relationships, your memory of it was nothing like what actually happened anyway. But the difference between thorough and comprehensive, if you sent someone to the grocer's and say, bring back one of each of the different fruit and vegetables in the grocer's, they'd come back with 2 bags. It's quite different from sending someone to the grocer's and saying, bring back everything in the grocer's. Now, if your aim is to discover what the grocer sells, you do not need to buy every single product in the grocer's to ascertain what they sell. You need one of each. So to ascertain what is wrong with me, I need one of each. One of each what? One of each defect. This St. Augustine prayer book list of character defects is absolutely splendid. And it's very, very comprehensive. Those monks, they knew a thing or two. They lived a little, it appears. And it's hilarious as well. What my favourite description of a character defect is the initiation, collection, and retailing of gossip. The retailing of gossip is so wonderful. Sometimes one wholesales it. But on 7 short pages of an A5 book, they cover all human ills. You and I have not come up with things which are not on that list. The precise nature of the details might be infinite in their variety, but it is the nature which matters. But in any case, because we're essentially giving up an immoral lifestyle, even if we miss things, the very fact that we're committing to live morally, as soon as you're living morally, as soon as you're doing the right thing, you are not doing every single wrong thing that a person could do. So the mere fact of doing the right thing, you don't even need to know what the wrong things are that you're not doing. You need to know what the right things are. The purpose of knowing the wrong things is to give yourself a bit of a heads up about what you have to give up. But it's really to get the secrets out in step 5 and to recoil with horror in step 6, to commit to the remainder of the program solidly in step 7. If you want to know what each step is for, it is never for itself, it is for the following step. And then you get to step 12, which is what the whole thing is about. So someone said, if I understand you right, minor irritations about others' behaviours, words are not resentments, and I need to find my part in it. Is this right? Well, there are a couple of things lumped together. Now, any emotional... When things happen, the emotions are like the lights on the dashboard which tell you that something is happening. In the engine, for instance. And it is normal and healthy to have a range of emotions. So if something irritating happens, of course, for a few seconds, you're going to have the flash of emotion. What is pathological is being unable to let it simply pass through and be restored to the status quo ante. In linguistics, I think I'm right in saying this, there's a certain type of verb I think it's called a semifactive verb, where, let's say, knocking at the door. When you knock at the door, you knock and it takes an instant, and the door is returned immediately to its initial state. The door is unchanged by this. You can knock 1,000 times and the door won't be changed. It is not a single knock, it's 1,000 separate knocks. During the course of the day, I have 1,000 separate emotions. And the core of me is very calm and peaceful and everything is fine. But on the surface, there are some waves. The ocean is supposed to have waves. But back to the verb types. If you ring someone's doorbell, you ring and then stop. And then everything goes back to the status quo ante. You could repeat the thing as many times as you want. It's different than peeling a banana. When you peel a banana, the banana is now peeled. You can't go back and re-peel the banana in the same way that you can re-knock at a door or re-ring a doorbell. So they're different types. So peeling and knocking are different types of verbs. That's the linguistics bit. Now, healthy emotions are ones where I have the emotion, oh, it's gone again. And it hasn't affected me deep inside. It hasn't unsettled me. It hasn't tipped me upside down. It hasn't diverted me onto a different course. It hasn't caused me to act out. I've just gone, ugh, and then it's gone. The pathological things we're interested in, imagine a doorbell. When you press the doorbell, you remove the finger and the doorbell just carries on ringing, and it's going to carry on ringing until you get the screwdriver out and unscrew it and see what's wrong in the mechanism. The problem here, I think resentment properly understood is an emotion which is untimely, disproportionate or inappropriate. In particular, one which is being held on to for an unnatural period of time. And so what I'm looking for in step 4 is simply a range of resentments to use as my worked examples to understand the basic anatomy of resentment. You could take minor irritations and actually work on them very well. I've often learnt a lot more about the minor things than the major ones. In the A Course in Miracles, it says, There is no such thing as a minor upset. All upsets are maximal because they destroy the peace of God. And I think that's right. A little thing or a big thing, the flavour may be different, but essentially disturbed is disturbed. Have you ever had, when you're waiting for a delivery and it's annoying you, and then the whole day is grey and miserable, and it's a trivial thing. So that don't be off put by the triviality of the circumstance. If something disturbs my peace, if something is more than the surface flutterings of emotions or the lights on the dashboard, that's when it deserves some attention. Now, finding one's part, one must always one's part has two elements. The first element is the part in the disturbance, if one is really disturbed by something, as opposed to a minor irritation. I'll give you an example of the real difference between a genuine minor irritation, which is not worth looking at, and one which really is worth looking at. Let's say you go to the supermarket and they've had a flood or something and it's shut and you have to walk a mile to the next one. You're going to be annoyed for a moment, but you immediately adjust. Compare that to a situation where the sponsee says they haven't done their step work. In 2 times out of 3, they haven't done their step work. If the 100th sponsee says they haven't done their step work and you're annoyed by it, it's not because you're surprised by it. There is something else going on, and it's not because they haven't done the step work, because that's a predictable thing which is going to happen. This is what I mean about when emotions are untimely, inappropriate, or disproportionate. That's when they deserve some. That's when they deserve some attention. How do you use the book to help others who are tied to their resentments about the past and want you as sponsor to agree with them? Let them go? Let the sponsee go or let the resentment go? Perhaps both. How do you use the book to help others? Probably the best thing is to hit them over the head very, very hard with it and hope that shifts something. If they want me to agree with them, they're talking to the wrong person. If they want to get over it, there is a little trick here. The little trick is, I shouldn't say this, but it's from the A Course in Miracles. Let me just bring it up. Just give me a moment. It starts off with the observation that I don't like how I feel. And that is something that even someone with a very, very profound resentment is normally able to do. They're able to say to themselves, you know what? Although I'm justified, I can agree. I don't like how I feel. It's absolutely rotten. Once someone can say, yeah, I really hate how I feel. This is just awful. You hit him with the next one. I hope I have been wrong. Now, if you feel absolutely awful and you're not wrong, you're going to be stuck like it forever. Whereas if you are wrong in your perception of the situation one way or another, then there is hope. It is the recognition that hope lies in being wrong, that one's best interests lie in being wrong. The next one is, once you realise that you don't like how you feel, that if you're going to feel better, you better hope you're wrong. You develop the desire. I want to be wrong. I want another way to look at this. I want another way to look at this means I want to realise, show me how I'm wrong. I had a friend, for years we had a pact. If ever we couldn't get past something, we got upset and we couldn't get unupset, we'd phone each other and we'd tell the story and then finish the story with this. I know I'm wrong. You tell me how, because I can't see it. but you start with the premise that you're wrong. But you have to have the desire first. I want to look at this differently means I want it to be proved how I'm wrong, and I want to be shown a different way. That doesn't mean that there is a different way. You then progress to the next stage. Perhaps there is another way to look at this. So you're not violenting yourself. You're not committing violence on yourself by forcing another view onto yourself. You're gradually edging towards it. It is possible, and this is such a wonderful thing. Is it possible there is a different way to look at this situation? No, there's only one way to look at this situation. You can't hold that position, honestly. You realise that there is always going to be another way to look at that situation. And then you can say, what can I lose by asking? You're miserable anyway. What's the worst that can happen? What this little procedure does, and I will put this in the chat if anyone is interested in it. What is brilliant about that is that it gradually loosens the grip on the narrative. But someone has got to want to get rid of it. Once they want to get rid of it, it's like a hot knife through butter. Just looking, there are a couple more questions which I'll get through as quickly as I can. Is resentment a resentment if you are the cause by saying or doing something wrong or bad which creates a reaction which causes you to have... Okay, so sometimes you're eliciting behaviour from other people and you're causing the resentment in a sense in that way. You're causing the behaviour or eliciting the behaviour which is pissing you off. But the emotional disturbance always comes from me, even if I'm entirely innocent on the action front, because I've got a pre-existing demand. And just to look at the questions in another chat. Is there a correct order in step 4? Yes. Do it. Just go through the book in the order that it's laid out. Do that. On the worksheet, is it... Oh, sorry, it keeps moving around. Do you do left to right on each one, or... I do all the names and then all the charges and then all the effects, because they're using different bits. The names, that's the faculty of memory. The charges, I need to be able to articulate what is going on out there. This affects I need to work out which area of my life is affected. They're different exercises. Much easier to do one exercise, finish it, go through with a sponsor. Next exercise, finish it, go through with it with a sponsor, tidy it up, and then go on to the next one. When a sponsee lists themselves on their resentment list and amends list, is it just another ode to the ego? Please. The amends to yourself is making amends to everyone else. And you've got to clear up your life because you're a grown-up, not because you're making amends to yourself. That's what grown-ups do. They sort their shit out. Diet, exercise, money, all of that stuff. You do that because you need to be in a fit state to do God's will. Anyway, but you're having a resentment against yourself. Now, you're going to need, let's say you resent 400 people, you're going to need to forgive 400 people, but you don't need to write about 400 people. The resentment against oneself, often it is true that with some people, the most persistent resentment is against themselves. It is the hardest one, but it is the least productive one to try to write about because you just can't see clearly. There's too much going on. It's like a bowl of congealed spaghetti. Every thread is glued to every other thread. To understand the anatomy of resentments, it's better to take uncomplicated cases, the same way that doctors in a hospital, when they're doing a ward round, if they want to explain diabetes and late stage renal failure to their medical students, they'll pick a patient that just has that, not a patient whose situation is complicated by half a dozen other medical conditions all at once, because then you'll get the pure thing in its native form, unadulterated by other conditions. So if you want to understand resentment, pick some ones which are not the big production numbers, which are not complicated. If you can, you start with the simple things, like C.S. Lewis says about forgiveness. Don't start with the Nazis, start with the woman at your sewing circle. and then you can work up to the Nazis after that. When I'm working with someone and they have what they call a justifiable resentment with an abuser or an attacker, I feel like the directions in the book seem inadequate. You might feel like that, but they're not. There's nothing in the book to say that we're supposed to say that the abuser or the attacker was actually a jolly good fellow and we should go and make friends with them. No, it says the world and its people were often quite wrong, but you're still upset about it 20 years later. Who's that helping? And I don't sound cruel about this, but I had some things happen to me, let me tell you, which would make your toes curl. But it was doing me no good to hold on to those things, particularly the grievance, the observation that those people did what they did is easily done and absolutely right. But that's a completely distinct question from being upset about it. The world will tell you that you're somehow doing something frightfully moral but by being upset about things. You're not. You're doing something moral by doing something about it. And a woman in Glasgow many years ago used the C word in a meeting, and I'll replace it with the word devil. She said, "You're of no good to anyone else if you're in a devil of a state yourself." So all of this bleating about the things which happened to me 30 years ago, that's not helping me help other people. You really want to help other people? Get over it and then show other people how to get over it. But you've got to have the desire. There is you see, the ego wants me to be resentful. Because if I am resentful at others, I'll never realise that the problem is the ego. That's why it wants me to be resentful. And I think this is the last one. Is it ego or self that makes one enjoy being angry? Like a monster that grows bigger, the angrier it gets, it kind of feels good. How does one get over that feeling to move past self-righteousness and resentments? Well, I think that this is the nub of the matter. The British historian David Starkey said about the British, he said, the reason they like sitting on the fence is they enjoy the sensation. And the thing about resentment, if I'm having a resentment, I'm enjoying it at some level. I'm getting a kick out of it. And you know what? It's true with fear as well. Because even when I'm full of fear and miserable, guess who's occupying my consciousness? I am. I'm the hero of the dream, and there's no one else on stage but me. This is enormously flattering to the self, because whatever the suffering is the price I'm paying for the prize. What is the prize is being important. It's being someone. And if you can't be someone by doing something interesting or important or relevant, you can be someone by being a victim of someone else's behaviour and being offended and being aggrieved and being up in arms and being this and that and manning the barricades and posting on social media and wearing lapel pins. Look at me. I'm the one with the moral compass. You fuckers don't have one, or you'd have a lapel pin too. I've been that person. It is delicious. I remember working in the City of London in one of these big evil city firms. It wasn't evil really, just a little bit. Reading my communist newspaper, thinking that I was the most sophisticated and insightful person there. I loved my grievances. The unhappiness will get your attention, but it's not the deal. It's not what it's about. That is the price that I'm willing to pay, apparently, for decades until I finally crack. And I'm going to finish on this line, Keith. I really promise I will. In the A Course in Miracles, there's a wonderful line. It says, people's tolerance for pain is high, but it is not infinite. There comes a point at which everyone cracks, and with any luck at all, you'll crack while you're still alive. So that's enough from me, Keith.